think it was the first, no, it must not be the first question.
Can I just say while you're looking for that, Karen,
Yes.
that to me, because we're isolated, we don't see the consequences, that's why we have to learn principles. Because I am not going to feel what it's like for other people. And to me, something I've learned since I've studied and looked for principles as my goal in ways that I never have before, I realized that a lot of principles are about consequences. The whole point of the principle is to say that this leads to this. And that's why it's a principle. It's the leading to this that is the unchanging truth of the principle. And so I may not be able to see or predict or understand the consequences, and I may not study enough of history in every place to know what the consequences have been everywhere else that they've done that. But if I can learn the principle and know that this always leads to this, then I don't even, I mean, I'm still going to try and learn, but I can't know all of that. But if I can know the principles, then I know what I need to know. Because that talks a lot about consequences.
The history is just the evidence
Yeah,
that piles up proven principle.
right. That's how we can, if we weren't quite sure, that's how we can know that it really is a principle.
I fight this problem all the time. I want to understand what's going on globally. And yet, where do you go
Okay,
to get the truth on what is going on globally?
I've got one book. If you've ever got time, it's over 1,500 pages. It's called Tragedy and Hope. It was by a man named Carroll Quigley, and he was a history professor, but he wrote the history of the people, of the bankers and financiers who were running this whole thing. And it's a seminal book because it revealed the whole thing. Up until that point, you'll see Skousen wrote a book called The Naked Communist, blaming the communists for everything. After this book came out, he wrote The Naked Capitalist. Because the
Is that the summary of this?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the Naked Capitalist is the summary of this book. Is
So
his
read The Naked
read
Capitalist.
of
We
it.
don't have time for 15.
Yeah, and it will give you a basic, clear idea. But so that book revealed what nobody before that time really understood. All these people fighting against it were fighting communism. Were wondering where all of these people were coming from in our government, all over our nation, who could claim not to be communists, but might as well have been called communists. It was because communism was just a tool of this organization. And so the book in itself is fascinating because he goes all the way back into the early history of Europe and Russia, back into the 1600s and earlier, about the development of all these nations and how they came together, and then into the 20th century. And so it's an amazing history book.
That would be
And
fascinating.
he was an insider, okay? The reason he knew all this is because he was in on the planning.
And he
of all
wrote it
this.
because he thought because he agreed with it. He wanted to reveal it to everybody. He thought it was a time that he could reveal it, and they couldn't do
everybody
anything.
could just
And it
jump
was
on
right.
that.
Nobody's jumped up in, other than a small groups of people have jumped up and say, oh. And so he revealed it and gave his prescription for where it should go at the end. I mean, you get all the way through it, and then at the end he starts saying, now all of this was just kind of accidental. Wouldn't it be much better if it was purposefully done, if we organized and could do all these good things? I mean, it's really crazy.
And just a quick aside, Paul had just read that book at about the time that Bill Clinton was having it was his second term he was running for. When he accepted the nomination for the presidency, he said, and I want to give credit for everything I am to Carroll Quigley and John F. Kennedy. And everybody heard John F. Kennedy and went, yes, and the whole nation went,
Miss Carol Quigley.
so, that we just got chilled when we heard it. Did he actually say that?
He was mentored by Carol Quigley.
What?
I just heard this Wednesday night. That's
Really?
amazing. Twice in a week.
Really?
I need to read this.
But it's a seminal book. Yeah, at least read The Naked Capitalist.
Will
So
say
where
what
do
it's
you find
called
the
again?
truth in current events?
Tragedy and Hope.
And tragedy and hope, does he talk about what that led to? Like those, the economic
Oh, yeah.
experiments that they did, how they ruined nations and...
I'm trying to think. It's been a long time since I've read it. He puts it in as positive a light as he can. But I mean, there's things like one of the big bankers in the 20s, he had 2 sons. And he assigned one son to become a Democrat and one son to become a Republican. Which tells you there's no difference.
No. And you know, my mother's always said that.
And
There's
that
no,
was back
the
in
only
the
difference
20s.
is one's getting there faster, but they're both going in the same
Well, yeah,
direction.
it's not even faster, it's at different methods. But
Yeah, yeah.
anyway, so there's no difference between Republican or Democrat
So
on a higher level.
that is fascinating. However, on a current events, on things that are happening in the world now,
Mhm.
as the world falls apart, I'd really like to know what's
Yeah.
going on out there. And where do you find? Do you have a resource that you use for foreign?
Yeah, it's called The New American. It's a publication of John Birch Society.
It's what we have trusted since the day I read a letter from Sister Flora Benson.
And that.
Oh no, it was from President
President
Benson
Benson.
to the New American that said, "I commend you on your fine publication, and would you send a complimentary copy of this, please, to my friends, Gordon B. Hinckley and Thomas S. Swanson." Well, we knew his connection, and so from that point on, we have always trusted the New American, and it has been an amazing source.
Is it a
over
magazine?
20
Is
years.
it
Mhm.
Yeah,
online?
it's a every 2-week
I
magazine.
don't think.
Well,
it's-
and nowadays, yeah, you can get into it. There's a site called thenewamerican.com, and they've gone really out into the web now because they realized they had to. So there's the John Birch Society site, but then there's the New American, and it's got tons of the articles, so it would be a good introduction. I don't think they always have everything that they have in the magazine, because they want people to buy the magazine.
Right.
But it
haven't
has-
seen them be wrong.
It has the
Right.
it has
They printed
all
it.
of, they keep history of all the major events and stuff, things they've written
And
about
what's
them.
cool too is they'll tell you what's happening and what they predict is going to happen if this course is followed. And in 20 years, we've never seen it wrong, have we? It just,
So
they
that's
understand the principles.
that's one. I mean,
Right.
there's a number out there, but that's one that we're really familiar with, and that has always been our source.
You know, I need 3 of me.
And once again, they have book reviews, and they'll bring up books.
Their whole purpose is
that
to
are-
educate
that are
people, not
good.
just
Yeah.
tell you to believe one thing or another, but say, here's some resources.
And they have a bookstore where you can buy things like The Law and Tragedy and Hope. And see, Tragedy and Hope went out of publication for a while, and then just recently, about 10 years ago, 15 years ago, somebody republished it.
That's a big project.
So it's
We have
people
all
would have a
these
chance
books
to read
if
it.
you want to borrow.
Oh. We've got one called The Creature from Jekyll Island,
I'm not read it if it's more than 300 pages.
and it's
I have
about
to break it up.
It's on audio tape.
Oh,
and it's about the Federal Reserve.
The Creature from Jekyll Island I've actually listened to.
Have you?
Yeah.
And I'm reading right now a book that kind of it teaches the Austrian economics principles,
Mhm.
which are very enlightening. Hello.
Yeah.
Anyway.
It's Joe's mentor, huh? Your favorite guy. What is this?
Who is it?
Mises. Mises.
Yeah.
Do you have any other questions
Oh
from
my
that that
gosh,
you
I
want
have
to
a
do?
whole list of questions, but you said 10 minutes for each of us, and I've taken way more than that tonight, so I'll
If-
have to be
if
done.
we
But that would
run
come
out,
up.
let's come to that.
Okay,
To more of your questions.
absolutely, I would love it.
Okay. Let's talk about lecture 5, which was the threats to liberty. Does anyone have any principles or comments they want to say about that lecture?
I left my notes in.
I can't do the reading because I'm involved in this other, I can't do the reading, but one of the biggest threats to liberty, I think, is, it branches out from what we were just talking about, as you were talking about, that we're cut off from natural consequences. And so we can make decisions that are skewed because we don't feel it, we don't know it. So I think one of the biggest threats to liberty in my book is public education, and that children are taken away from their homes at an early day, and they're turned to be peer dependent and tuned toward the group. They're also taken out of I'm so into forest kindergartens and all of that, some of the European nations are doing, and let the kids experience the concrete world and see consequences of doing this. And we don't even have it on a brain developmental level of what do they call it? Just the concept building. We can't even do good concept building because we don't allow children to experiment with the way they need to. So I think that's one of the biggest threats to liberty is because out of this system where we keep kids in pretty much a box all day long, they get ideas. Well, then they have a virtual world that they're participating in. They're still cut off from real consequences. They blow things up and they never feel it. I just think it's deteriorating people's ability to think to critically think.
We'll think along that line. We are going to teach our children liberty by taking away their liberty and putting them in a forced school system. Everybody has to go to public school. It's a law.
It's one of the have-tos.
Right.
And everybody
So
has to
we're teaching them
regurgitate
liberty.
exactly what the teacher says, not
So
what they
we've
really
taken away their
Pass the
liberty
standardized
to
test.
teach them about liberty and about being free people.
And instead of teaching true principles, they're teaching, I don't even know how to define it. It's just like, it's observe and document. I mean, even at the university level, I graduated from BYU Business School, economics, complete Keynesian, so just not based on true principles that really enlighten and open up the world for you. And that's quality education today.
At a private school.
Serious.
At a private school.
At a private
yeah.
school.
Anyway.
Yeah.
And I was taught, this is the other thing about education that my BYU education that I really croak over. I was in business school. They teach you in business school that your purpose for being in business is to benefit the shareholder. That's number one. Number one is your shareholder. That means it's all about money. It's all about the bottom line because the shareholders don't really care about anything these days except am I making money? Which completely skews your whole ethical approach, right? It should be my customer is first,
So that I have money to give the shareholders.
Employees, so that they
my employees are next, my customer is first, my employees are next, and then the shareholder.
Well, the first is called the pursuit of happiness. The first thing, the very first thing is your business.
yeah.
Is the purpose, why you created it, how you're going to keep it going. And so keeping it going is taking care of your customer.
Well, and then it has
Taking, moral